The Alpha King was ready to sign her death warrant, but the blood on her hands tells a different story. By saving the monarch, this mysterious warrior has exposed an ancient lineage that challenges every law in the pack. Now the king must decide. Follow the old ways or kneel to his savior. The music was still playing when death entered the room. It slipped between laughter and silk, unseen, unnoticed, until it wasn't. Aurelya felt it before she saw it. A shift in the air. A wrongness that didn't belong among polished marble and gilded pillars. Her body tensed instinctively, every hidden instinct rising like a warning she could not ignore. Across the hall, Alpha King Varkon Lyros stood surrounded by nobles, his presence commanding even in stillness. Firelight danced across his armor, catching the gold engravings, the fur at his shoulders. Untouchable. Unbreakable. A lie. The assassin moved from the shadows behind him, silent, precise, inevitable. Steel flashed. Time shattered. Aurelya didn't think. She moved. The world narrowed into a single line, the blade, the king, the space between them. Her feet left the ground before reason could stop her, her body cutting through the crowd as gasps began to rise too late. The dagger flew. Straight for his heart. And she caught it. Pain exploded through her palm, sharp and immediate, the force of the throw driving the blade deep enough to burn, to sear. Poison kissed her skin, cold and vicious, but she didn't let go. She couldn't. The tip of the dagger stopped a breath away from the king's chest. For a single heartbeat, everything froze. Her blood dripped first. Dark red against polished stone. Then the room erupted. Screams tore through the silence. Guards surged forward, weapons drawn, too slow, too late. The assassin was already falling, struck down by another blade, his body collapsing into shadow behind her. But Aurelya didn't see it, didn't hear it. All she knew was the heat of the dagger in her hand, and the man standing in front of her. Alive. Her breath came sharp, uneven. Her grip trembled, not from fear, but from the realization of what she had just done, what she had revealed. Slowly she lifted her gaze. The first thing Aurelya noticed was the silence. Not the kind that followed shock, but the kind that judged. It pressed in from every side, thick and suffocating, as if the entire hall had turned its gaze into a blade aimed at her throat. The music had died. The laughter was gone. Even the flames along the pillars seemed to still, their flickering reduced to a watchful tremble. Her hand still burned. Blood slid down her wrist, dripping steadily from the dagger she hadn't yet released. The poison throbbed beneath her skin, cold and creeping, but it was nothing compared to the weight of what came next. Guards closed in. Not toward the fallen assassin. Toward her. Aurelia's breath hitched, her instincts screaming to move, to fight, to disappear. But she forced herself to stay still. One wrong motion now, and this would end before it even began. Metal clashed as swords were drawn. "Drop it," one of the royal guards barked, his voice sharp with something that wasn't fear. It was accusation. Slowly, Aurelya loosened her grip. The dagger slipped from her blood-slick fingers and struck the floor with a hollow clang, echoing far louder than it should have. For a moment she thought, hoped someone would speak, that someone would say what had just happened. She saved him. But no one did. Instead, the murmurs began. "Did you see that?" She caught it. "That's not possible. It's illegal. Illegal." The word spread faster than truth ever could. Aurelya swallowed, her chest tightening as the reality settled in. Not one of them saw a life saved. Not one of them cared that the king still stood breathing. They saw her. What she was. Or worse, what she wasn't supposed to be. Hands seized her arms. Rough. Unforgiving. She didn't resist as they wrenched them behind her back, cold iron biting into her wrists. The movement sent a sharp pulse through her injured hand, but she held her breath through it, refusing to give them the satisfaction of pain. Her gaze flickered once to him. Varkon Lyros hadn't moved. He stood exactly where she had stopped the blade, towering untouched, his golden eyes locked on her as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. There was no confusion in his expression, no gratitude, only a deep, unsettling focus, as if he were seeing through her, into her. "Your Majesty," one of the council elders stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade honed for this exact moment. "This display cannot go unanswered." Aurelia's pulse pounded. Display. Not salvation. The laws are clear, the elder continued, his gaze flicking toward her with thinly veiled disdain. Unauthorized combatability, concealed skill. These are not traits of a compliant subject. They are signs of rebellion. A ripple of agreement followed. Detain her, another voice added coldly. She will answer for this violation. Violation. Aurelya let out a slow breath, something inside her settling. Not into fear, but into something sharper. So this was how it would be. Not as a savior, but as a threat. The guards began to drag her back, her boots scraping faintly against the stone as the distance between her and the king widened. Still he said nothing. Did nothing. And yet, his gaze never left her. It burned into her skin more than the poison ever could, steady, unyielding, and far too aware. Aurelya lifted her chin despite the iron at her wrists, meeting that gaze fully now. If this was the moment everything ended, she would not look away. Because deep down, beneath the rising tension, beneath the weight of judgment and chains, she knew one thing with terrifying certainty. This wasn't over. Not for her. Not for him. And not for the kingdom that had just witnessed something it could never pretend hadn't happened. The cell was colder than Aurelya expected. Not from the stone, nor the iron that bound her wrists to the wall, but from the silence that lived there. It stretched, endless and watchful, broken only by the slow drip of water somewhere beyond the narrow corridor. Her hand throbbed. The wound had been wrapped, crudely, as if preserving her life was necessary. But her comfort was not. The poison had dulled into a heavy ache beneath her skin, pulsing with each beat of her heart. She sat still, back straight despite the chains, her breathing steady. Waiting. The sound came eventually. Measured footsteps. Heavy. Certain. Not a guard. The air shifted before the door even opened. Something deeper, sharper, pressing into the space like an unseen force that demanded recognition. The lock turned. The door creaked. And he stepped in. Alpha King Varkon Lyros did not belong in a place like this. Even here, beneath stone and shadow, he carried the same presence as in the great hall, commanding, unshaken, impossible to ignore. Firelight from the corridor traced the lines of his armor, the fur at his shoulders casting a larger silhouette against the walls. But it was his eyes that found her first. Golden. Steady. Unrelenting. The guard behind him hesitated. Your Majesty, it may not be. Leave. The word was quiet. It was not a suggestion. The door shut again, sealing them into silence. Aurelya didn't move. Didn't lower her gaze. If this was to be her end, she would meet it without bowing. Varkon took a step closer. Then another. Slow. Deliberate. As if approaching something unpredictable. Most would be begging by now, he said, his voice low, carrying easily in the confined space. Aurelia's lips parted slightly, her voice rough but steady. Most didn't stop a blade meant for your heart. Something flickered in his expression. Not anger. Interest. He stopped just beyond her reach, his gaze dropping briefly to her bound hands, the bandaged palm stained faintly through the cloth. You caught it, he said, almost to himself. Bare-handed. Aurelya held his gaze. Would you have preferred I let it strike? A pause. Not long, but long enough to shift the air between them. That isn't what I'm questioning. His eyes lifted again, sharper now, searching. People like you don't exist in my kingdom. The words were calm, certain, and completely wrong. Aurelya felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, but something older. Something she had buried for years beneath silence and survival. Then your kingdom doesn't see everything it owns, she replied quietly. Silence followed. Heavy. Dangerous. Varkon stepped closer. Close enough now that she could see the faint scars along his jaw, the subtle tension in his shoulders. Not of threat, but of restraint. You hid it, he said. Your strength. Your skill. Yes. Why? The question landed harder than any accusation. Aurelia's gaze didn't waver. Because this is what happens when I don't. His jaw tightened. For the first time, something in his composure shifted. Not outwardly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but she saw it. Fracture. A realization he didn't like. You broke the law, he said finally. Aurelya exhaled softly. I saved your life. Their gazes locked. Neither yielding. Neither retreating. For a moment it felt like something far greater than a conversation. Something ancient, unspoken, pulling tight between them like a thread stretched to breaking. Varkon's eyes darkened, the gold within them burning deeper now. Yes, he said. Not denial. Not agreement. Something else entirely. His hand lifted slightly, then stilled, as if catching himself before crossing a line he wasn't ready to name. You shouldn't exist, he murmured again, quieter this time. Aurelya's pulse steadied. Yet I do. Another silence. Longer now. Charged. And then something shifted completely. Not in her. In him. The way he looked at her changed. Not as a ruler assessing a threat, nor a judge measuring a crime, but as a man who had just found something he did not expect. And could not ignore. You're not being executed, Varkon said at last. The words should have felt like relief. They didn't. Because of what came next. Not yet. Aurelia's breath slowed, her mind already moving, already calculating. This wasn't mercy. This was something far more dangerous. Varkon turned toward the door, then paused just slightly. Without looking back, he added, You don't belong in chains. A beat. And I intend to find out why. The door opened, then closed again, leaving Aurelia alone in the silence once more. But this time it felt different, because the man who ruled her fate was no longer certain of it. Sleep did not come. The silence of the cell stretched thinner with every passing hour, until it felt less like absence and more like pressure. Waiting, listening, remembering. Aurelia sat where he had left her, wrist still bound, her injured hand resting carefully against her lap. The ache had dulled but not disappeared. It pulsed beneath the bandage, steady as a warning. Or a reminder. She closed her eyes. Not to rest. To hold the past where it belonged. Didn't listen. It came anyway. Dust in the air. The sharp scent of iron. The low echo of footsteps in a place far beneath the world above. Again. The voice had been cold. Unforgiving. Aurelia's younger self stood barefoot on stone. Her breathing ragged, her hands already raw. The blade in her grip felt too heavy then, too real, but she held it anyway. I can't. Again. No room for weakness. No space for fear. She had moved. Too slow. The strike came before she could recover, wood cracking against her ribs, sending her to the ground with a sharp gasp. Pain flared. Her vision blurred. On your feet. She didn't hesitate the second time. Because hesitation had consequences. Because in that place failure wasn't corrected. It was punished. Aurelia's eyes snapped open. The memory shattered, but the tension remained, coiled tightly in her chest. Her breathing stayed even, controlled, but her fingers had curled instinctively, as if still gripping a weapon that wasn't there. She exhaled slowly. That part of her life was gone. Buried. It had to be. A faint sound pulled her attention to the corridor outside. Voices, low, careful, but not quiet enough to escape notice. She moved like one of them. That's impossible. The order was wiped out generations ago. Then explain what we saw. A pause. No answer came. Aurelia's gaze lowered, her jaw tightening just slightly. The order. Even now they didn't speak its name. Didn't dare to. Another voice, sharper this time. It doesn't matter. If the council confirms it, she won't leave this place alive. Footsteps followed. The voices faded. Silence returned. But it no longer felt empty. Aurelia leaned her head back against the cold stone, her eyes tracing the faint cracks in the ceiling above. For years she had lived carefully, quietly, hiding every instinct that had been carved into her through pain and discipline. Every movement calculated. Every reaction restrained. Until the moment she broke. One blade. One choice. And now everything she had buried was rising to the surface. Her lips pressed into a thin line. If they truly understood what she was, what she had been trained to be, they wouldn't hesitate. They would kill her. Not for breaking the law, but for existing beyond it. The sound of metal shifted softly as she adjusted her wrists, testing the weight of the chains without appearing to. The iron held firm, biting slightly into her skin. Strong, but not unbreakable. Her gaze sharpened, something quieter and more dangerous settling beneath her calm. She had survived worse than this. Much worse. And if the past had taught her anything, It was that cages only held those who believed they belonged in them. Aurelya lowered her gaze to her bound hands, the faint stain of blood still visible through the cloth. The kingdom saw a lawbreaker. The council saw a threat. But somewhere beneath all of that, something older had awakened, and it wasn't going back into the shadows. Not now. Not ever again. They came for her at dawn. No announcement. No ceremony. Just the cold scrape of metal as the cell door opened and the weight of decision stepped inside. Aurelya was already standing. The chains had been removed moments before, not as mercy, but as preparation. 2 guards flanked her, their grips firm, their silence heavier than words. They didn't meet her eyes. They didn't need to. The verdict had already begun forming long before she entered the room. The walk through the corridors felt longer than it was. Torches burned low against stone walls, their light flickering like something uncertain, something watching. Every step echoed, measured and final, as if the castle itself knew what waited ahead. When the doors to the court opened, the world shifted. Light poured in golden, blinding after the dimness below. Rows of nobles filled the chamber, their voices a low murmur that swelled the moment she appeared. Aurelya didn't falter. She stepped forward, chin lifted, her gaze steady as it swept across the assembly. Silk and armor, jewels and power, all of it turned toward her now, not in admiration but in judgment. At the center, elevated above them all, sat the council. Ancient, unyielding. And beside them, the throne. Varkon Lyros was already there. Still. Silent. Watching. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Something sharp enough to cut through the noise. Then it was gone. Bring her forward. The command rang out from the eldest council member. His voice thin but absolute. Aurelya was led to the center of the chamber. Alone. The guard stepped back, leaving her exposed beneath the weight of a kingdom's gaze. You stand accused, the elder began, his sharp eyes narrowing, of violating the sacred laws that govern order within this realm. Aurelya said nothing. You displayed combat ability beyond your rank. You concealed strength forbidden to your kind. And in doing so, you disrupted the natural hierarchy that preserves our stability. A ripple of agreement moved through the court. Not one voice spoke in her defense. You claim she disrupted order, a younger councilman added, his tone colder. Yet what she truly did was expose it. If one like her exists, how many more might follow? Fear. There it was. Not of her actions. Of what she represented. The elder leaned forward slightly. Such imbalance cannot be allowed to spread. Aurelia's fingers curled faintly at her sides, her pulse steady despite the rising tension. So you would have preferred the king dead? She asked, her voice calm, cutting clean through the murmurs. The chamber stilled. The elder's gaze hardened. The survival of one man does not outweigh the survival of order. A lie. And they all knew it. Silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Then came the words that had been waiting since the moment she caught the blade. For the preservation of law. And the protection of the realm. A pause. Final. We call for her execution. The chamber erupted. Voices rose, some in agreement, others in uneasy whispers, but none strong enough to challenge the declaration. Aurelya didn't move. Didn't react. Because this moment had always been inevitable. Her gaze shifted once more. To the throne. To him. Varkon had not spoken. Not yet. But he hadn't looked away either. His eyes remained locked on hers, unreadable, burning with something deeper than the chaos around them. The court waited. The council expected. The kingdom held its breath. Because now, the decision no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the king. Silence stretched across the court, taut as a drawn blade. All eyes turned to the throne. Varkon Lyros did not rise immediately. He remained seated, one hand resting against the carved arm of the throne, the other loose but still. Yet there was nothing passive in his stillness. It was the kind that held power in check, not the absence of it. Aurelya felt it before he moved. A shift. Subtle. Inevitable. When he finally stood, the room seemed to tighten around him. Execution, he repeated, his voice low, carrying without effort. Not a question. A statement. The elder inclined his head slightly. For the preservation of order, your majesty. Varkon's gaze drifted. Not to the council but to Aurelya. steady, searching, as if weighing something unseen. Order, he said again, quieter this time. Then he stepped down. Each movement deliberate, controlled, the sound of his boots against stone echoing through the chamber as he descended from the throne and walked toward her. The crowd parted instinctively, as though drawn back by something they could not resist. Aurelya didn't move, didn't lower her gaze. If this was where it ended, she would meet it standing. He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the faint flicker of something behind his golden eyes. Not doubt, recognition. Raise your hand, he said. The command was soft, unavoidable. Aurelya hesitated only for a breath before lifting her injured hand. The bandage stained faintly where blood had seeped through. Murmurs rippled through the court. Varkon reached out. His fingers closed around her wrist, firm, steady. The same unyielding grip from the moment everything changed. But this time it wasn't restraint. It was examination. Aurelya's pulse stilled. Not from fear. From the sudden, unmistakable shift in the air. Something deeper stirred as his touch lingered. Ancient. Awake. His gaze dropped to her palm, then sharpened. The faintest line of gold shimmered beneath her skin, barely visible through the blood and cloth, like light trying to break through something long buried. The room went still. Varkon's grip tightened slightly. Remove it. The nearest guard froze. Your Majesty. Now. The bandage was pulled away, and the court saw it. A mark, faint, glowing beneath her skin. A delicate pattern, curved and sharp all at once, like a crest carved in light rather than flesh. Not a wound. Aurelia's breath caught. She hadn't seen it before. Had never. The elder stepped forward abruptly, his composure cracking for the first time. That's not possible. A murmur spread, rising fast into something closer to unease. No, another voice whispered, almost to himself. Those markings were lost, eradicated with the last of them. Varkon's eyes lifted slowly to meet Aurelia's. And this time there was no uncertainty in them. Only certainty. And something far more dangerous. They weren't lost, he said quietly. The words cut clean through the chamber. They were erased. The elder's voice sharpened. Your Majesty, whatever this illusion is, it's not an illusion. Varkon released her wrist, but the absence of his touch felt heavier than its presence. He turned just slightly, enough for the entire court to hear him clearly. This mark predates this council, he said. Predates our laws. A pause. Then. It predates the throne. Silence fell like a blow. Aurelya stood frozen, her mind catching up to the weight of what was unfolding. The fragments of her past, the training, the secrecy, the buried truths, shifted into something larger, something she had never been allowed to understand. Not just hidden, forbidden. The elder's voice trembled now, threaded with something dangerously close to fear. If this is true, then she is not bound by our order. No, Varkon said. His gaze returned to Aurelya. Sharp, certain. She is the reason it exists. The room broke. Voices rose, panic threading through control as the foundation beneath them cracked. But Aurelya heard none of it, because for the first time, she understood why she had been trained to survive, why she had been forced to hide, why she had been hunted without ever knowing it. Her blood was not a mistake. It was a legacy, and now, it had been seen. The court did not recover. It fractured. Voices rose over one another, no longer controlled, no longer measured. Fear stripping away the polished restraint of power. Nobles shifted back, distance suddenly more valuable than status, as if proximity to Aurelya might rewrite their place in the world. At the center of it all she stood still. The faint gold beneath her skin had dimmed, but its presence lingered, seen, remembered, undeniable. And Varkon Lyros did not move away from her. If anything, he stepped closer. Your Majesty, the elder's voice cut through the chaos, strained now, sharpened by urgency. This changes nothing. Whatever she is, whatever relic of the past she carries, it does not grant her immunity from the law. Varkon turned slowly. Not rushed. Not reactive. Deliberate. It changes everything, he said. The weight of his voice struck harder than any raised shout. Silence rippled outward again, not complete, but enough. The elder straightened, forcing authority back into his posture. Our laws were built to prevent exactly this. Power without structure leads to collapse. If she stands above the order, then the order itself is meaningless. Aurelia's gaze flickered, not to the council, but to Varkon. Watching. Measuring. The line had been drawn. Now he would choose which side to stand on. Varkon descended the final step until he stood fully among them, not as a distant ruler, but as something far more present, more dangerous. Our laws were built on fear, he said, his tone even but edged with something unyielding. Fear of what came before us. Fear of power we could not control. The elder's eyes narrowed. And that fear preserved this kingdom. No, Varkon replied. It diminished it. A ripple moved through the court. Not agreement, not defiance, but uncertainty. The kind that spreads when something once absolute begins to crack. You would risk everything, another council member pressed, stepping forward now, his voice rising. For one woman? The question hung in the air. Simple. Deceptive. Varkon's gaze did not leave Aurelya as he answered. I would risk everything, he said quietly. For the truth. Something in the room shifted again. Not louder this time. Deeper. The elder's composure fractured fully now. This is not truth, this is instability. You cannot allow her to stand. Not like this. Not after what she represents. Aurelya felt the weight of those words settle. Not as accusation, but as confirmation. They didn't fear her actions. They feared her existence. Varkon finally turned back to the council. His expression no longer measured, no longer restrained. Decided. You demanded her execution, he said. No one spoke. You called her a threat to order. Stillness. Then. You were right. Aurelia's breath stilled. The court leaned forward, tension sharpening instantly. But Varkon didn't stop. She is a threat, he continued, his voice lowering, carrying something darker now. To a system built on suppression. To laws that bury strength instead of wielding it. He stepped forward again, placing himself fully between Aurelya and the council. A barrier. Not symbolic. Real. And I will not enforce laws that weaken my kingdom out of fear of what it could become. The elder's voice dropped, dangerous now. Be careful, your majesty. A king who stands against his council stands alone. A pause. Heavy. Final. Varkon's expression did not change. I have never been anything else. The words landed like a strike. Clean. Unshaken. And in their wake, something irreversible settled into place. The balance of power had shifted. Not loudly. Not completely. But enough. Aurelya felt it, not in the room, not in the crowd, but in him. The moment he chose not just to question the law, but to stand against it. And for the first time since the blade had been thrown, she was no longer alone in what she had become. The silence that followed was not submission. It was resistance gathering its breath. The council did not retreat. They rose. One by one, robes shifting like shadows peeling from stone. Their presence no longer ceremonial but active. Power stepping forward to meet power. If you will not uphold the law, the elder said, his voice no longer strained but sharpened into something resolute, then the law will uphold itself. Aurelya felt it then. Not fear. Pressure. Ancient and rigid, pressing down from every direction as if the very foundation of the court had awakened. The air thickened, heavy with something unseen but unmistakable. Authority woven into the bones of the kingdom. Bindings. Not physical. Something older. Her breath slowed as it brushed against her skin, searching, testing, recognizing. A murmur spread through the nobles as the council's power gathered, their combined presence forming something oppressive, something meant to force submission without a blade ever being drawn. Stand down, your majesty, another council member commanded, his voice echoing unnaturally now. This is no longer your decision alone. Varkon did not step back. The faintest shift of his stance was all the warning there was. No, he said. The word cut through the pressure. It didn't break it. But it held. The elder's gaze darkened. Then you leave us no choice. The force descended. Invisible yet crushing. Aurelia's knees threatened to give. The weight slamming into her chest, dragging at her breath, forcing her body toward the ground. Submission. That was what it demanded. Not death. Not yet. Surrender. Around her, nobles dropped to their knees without resistance, heads bowing under the command embedded in the air itself. Aurelia's vision blurred at the edges. Her body trembled, but did not fall. Something within her rose in answer. Not loud, not sudden, but undeniable. Heat spread beneath her skin, threading through her veins, coiling around her spine like something long asleep finally stirring. The faint gold beneath her palm flared. No longer hidden, no longer restrained. The pressure pushed harder. Her breath caught, and then steadied. No, she whispered. Not to them. To the force itself. It resisted, pressed, demanded. Aurelia lifted her head. The movement was small, but it shattered something. A crack, silent but absolute, split through the weight bearing down on her. Light flickered beneath her skin, stronger now, tracing faint lines along her wrist, her arm alive. The room shifted. Gasps broke through the suffocating air as the unseen force faltered. Just for a moment. Just enough. Varkon moved. Not away from her. Toward her. He stepped into the pressure without hesitation, his presence colliding with it. Not yielding, not bending. His hand found hers again, firm, grounding, unyielding. And the moment their skin met, something ignited. The force broke. Not slowly. Not gradually. It shattered. The invisible weight collapsed outward like a wave striking stone, snapping the hold it had over the room. Nobles gasped as the pressure vanished, the council staggering. Not from weakness, but from something far more dangerous. Disruption. Aurelia stood fully now. No chains. No weight. No submission. The gold beneath her skin pulsed once, then settled, no longer hidden, no longer faint. Seen. The elder's voice trembled despite his effort to steady it. This is exactly why she cannot be allowed to exist. But the words had lost something. Authority. Certainty. Fear had taken its place. Varkon turned slowly, positioning himself at Aurelia's side. Not in front of her, not shielding her. Beside her. Equal. You built your power on control, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. And now you've seen what happens when it meets something it cannot contain. The council did not respond. For the first time, they had nothing left to enforce it with. The crown had not fallen, but it had cracked. And everyone in the room felt it. The end of something old. The beginning of something they could no longer stop. No one spoke. The silence that followed was not uncertainty anymore. It was surrender waiting to be named. Aurelia stood at the center of it, the last echo of power still humming beneath her skin. The gold had faded from sight, but not from presence. It lingered in the air, in the way no one moved to touch her. No one dared step too close. For the first time, the court did not see a prisoner. They saw something they could not define, something they could not control. Varkon Lyros turned to face them all, not as a man divided, but as a king who had chosen. The council has spoken, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber, steady and absolute. And so have I. Every gaze fixed on him, every breath held. Aurelia felt it, the shift, the moment before something irreversible takes form. Her pulse slowed, not from calm but from clarity. This was the edge of everything. You called her a threat, Varkon continued. You called for her execution to preserve the order of this kingdom. His eyes hardened slightly. But you were wrong about one thing. He turned, fully, toward her. Aurelia didn't move, didn't look away. Whatever came next, she would meet it as she had met everything else. Standing, Varkon stepped closer. No hesitation, no doubt. The distance between them closed until there was nothing left of it, until the entire court could see clearly what had already begun long before this moment. His hand lifted. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then his fingers closed around her wrist. The same grip, the same unyielding certainty. But this time there was no restraint in it, only declaration. She is not a threat to this kingdom, Varkon said, his voice lowering, not softer but heavier, each word settling into the bones of the court. She is its origin. A ripple moved through the nobles, shock, disbelief, something deeper that had no name yet. Aurelia felt her breath catch, not from fear, not from doubt, but from the weight of what he was doing, what he was about to make real. Varkon did not release her. Instead, he stepped forward, drawing her with him until they stood side by side before the throne. Not ruler and subject, not king and accused. Something else, something new. The blood she carries predates our laws, he continued. Predates this council. Predates the very structure you claim to defend. No one interrupted. No one dared. And I will not allow this kingdom to bury its own foundation out of fear. The elder opened his mouth. Whether to protest or command, it didn't matter. Varkon spoke over him. Final. Decisive. I do not spare her. The words struck the room like a blade. Aurelya's pulse stilled. For a fraction of a second, everything sharpened. Then, I recognize her. Silence shattered into something deeper than sound. Varkon's grip tightened slightly. Not force, not restraint. Claim. As Alpha King, he said, his voice unwavering, I invoke the right of sovereign claim. A collective breath was drawn. Held. Broken. I name Aurelya Sorn. He paused just long enough for the weight of her name to settle across the chamber, across the kingdom, across history itself. As my queen. The words did not echo. They anchored. Something shifted, irreversible, undeniable, as if the very walls had accepted what the court could not yet comprehend. Aurelya stood still. Not because she was uncertain, but because something within her had just aligned with something beyond her. The past. The power. The truth she had never been allowed to understand. It rose, not violently, not uncontrollably, but completely. Her gaze lifted, meeting his. And for the first time there was no distance between what she had been forced to hide and what she was. Around them the court remained frozen, caught between defiance and inevitability, between the world they knew and the one now forming before them. Because this was no longer a question of law, or power, or tradition. This was a beginning. And nothing, no council, no crown, no fear, would ever make it undone. The court did not erupt. It stilled. As if the kingdom itself had paused to understand what had just been done to it. Aurelya felt it in the air, the shift settling into something permanent. Not chaos. Not yet. Something quieter. Acceptance. Waiting to take shape. Varkon's hand remained around her wrist, steady, grounding, not as restraint, but as something far more binding than chains. A choice. His. And now hers. The council did not bow. But they did not rise against him either. Not anymore. The elder stood frozen, his authority cracked beyond repair. His voice gone where certainty had once lived. Around him the others wavered. Not in loyalty but in belief. Because the truth had already taken root. They had felt it. They had seen it. And no law could unmake what had been revealed. Aurelya stepped forward. Not pulled. Not guided. On her own. The movement was small, but it carried through the chamber like a final answer. Varkon released her wrist. Not to let her go, but because he no longer needed to hold her there. She stood beside him willingly now. Equal. Seen. Her gaze moved across the court, across the nobles who had once looked at her with dismissal. Then fear. And now something far more uncertain. Respect. Not given. Earned. You feared what I was, she said, her voice calm, steady. No longer quiet, no longer hidden. Because you believed power must be controlled to survive. No one interrupted. No one dared. But power buried becomes weakness, she continued. And weakness invites collapse. The words settled deep. Not as defiance. As truth. Her eyes shifted briefly to the council. Then back to the room. I am not your destruction, she said. I am what was lost when you chose fear over strength. Silence answered her. But it was no longer empty. It was listening. Varkon stepped forward then, his presence aligning with hers, not overshadowing, not claiming, standing with her. This kingdom will not fall, he said, his voice carrying the final weight of command. It will rise. No challenge came. No voice stood against him. Because they all understood now. This was no longer a rule that could be enforced. It was a future that could not be stopped. The elder lowered his gaze first. Not submission, but recognition of something greater than his control. One by one others followed. Not all, but enough. Enough for the shift to become real. Aurelya exhaled slowly, something within her settling at last. Not into peace but into purpose. The past no longer pressed against her. It stood with her. No longer hidden. No longer denied. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting Varkon's once more. No chains. No judgment, no distance, only understanding, and something stronger than either of them alone. Beyond the towering pillars, beyond the court and crown, the first light of dawn began to spill across the kingdom, soft at first, then stronger, breaking through the shadows that had ruled for far too long. A new era did not arrive with fire. It arrived with truth, and it stood unshaken, in the form of a queen who had once been forced to hide, and a king who chose to stand beside her, not above, not ahead, but with her. As the light touched the throne, the court, and the people who would carry this change forward, one truth remained, clear and undeniable. The blade that was meant to end a life had instead begun a legacy, and this time, it would not be buried,